what I like to do now is to introduce to everybody who you are and what you do. I'll start with a little bit of a preamble. You guys add on to that. Bruce, you've been in the game industry for close to 30 years now, writing for it. You've written everything from Dungeons and Dragons on through the Cypher system. Tell us a little bit about your CV.
Yeah, so obviously I played D&D from a very early age, probably late 70s. And basically I had a friend who got a job at Iron Crown Enterprises, and so that was very lucky for me because he asked me many times to write something. I was like, no. But finally I did, and he published it, and I had some writing credits. And then I actually went to school to be a biologist in a biopharmaceutical company. I got a job right out of college. I was doing RNA, DNA synthesis, and these machines were connected to the early internet. And that was the early 90s. And I really got into these multi-user dungeons and mushes, which are basically D&D online, right? I learned to code, and I really, I would just wrote up a storm. I spent way too much time doing that. And at that time, around 95, TSR was looking for someone to write a D&D branded MUD or mush, and they hired me. And of course, that never went anywhere once I got there, but that's how I got into the industry. And they just said, well, do you want to write D&D? There was another guy named Bruce who worked there. He quit. You can have his seats. I was like, okay. So, and they had me write Gates of Firestorm Peak, and they had me write Return to the Tomb of Horrors, yes, right? Yes. And I basically have been writing full time. It's supported my I've done this full time since '95. So if you write that long every single day for almost 30 years, you build up quite a list of credits. So
where can folks go online to find your most recent works?
They could go to brucecordell.com and look at the tab that says design credits. They could go to MCG, which I left Wizards in 2013, right as we were finishing design on 5th edition. And I've been there now it'll be 10 years in August of this year, so montecookgames.com as well. So
that's brucecordell.com and montecookgames.com.
That's right.
Wonderful. Luke, how'd you get your start?
Well, funny you ask. I guess you can call me patient zero. I was the first person ever raised role-playing. From my earliest memories are actually playing games. I don't remember a time where I wasn't role-playing. And I know that's different for people who usually discover it through a friend or whatever, but it's what my dad and his friends and my brother would do, and so I wanted to hang out at the table and roll dice like them. So probably, I think I was 4 the first time I sat down to play a game, and I use that term loosely. I mean, I was shaking the dice and going, what's going on? Do I hit this thing, right? Because that's the exciting part for kids a lot of times is the bashing part and that excitement of winning. And then I graduated to DMing for my sisters and neighborhood friends. And of course, I would sit in my dad's office or his den, and we'd have D&D adventures, and I'd help him create, whether it's a creature or a magic item or a spell or something through play. And I'd read all the stuff as I grew up. I'd read all the things that he was typing on his typewriter, and so I just kind of became inculcated in a creative process through being around that since I was knee high, and being able to participate. With great folks who were there. Some of the early names that you might recognize were, household friends and kind of uncles to me, So my dad passed away in 2008, and I hold a convention that celebrates his life as well as those of the other designers who are alive and those who are no longer with us. And so, Tim Kask and Jim Ward are kind of like uncles. I've known them forever. And Tom Wam too, and several other folks. So it's great to reconnect with them as adults and be able to know them, which has been pretty cool. Interestingly enough, things that you were talking about really earlier made me think. You said Marvel Universe. Well, the first producer who got the X-Men movie going, right? Because Marvel was not in good shape at that point. Believe it or not, Marvel was ready to be chopped up and every character auctioned off. But fortunately, a guy named Tom DeSanto was a producer who came in there, a young producer, fought for it and made it happen. His company is Paladin Productions.
Paladin?
because he played D&D, and he talked to me about it. He's like, that's, it's Paladin Productions for a reason. I believe in a code or whatever. I learned that through D&D. So that's pretty important. And he has like $6 billion in box office. So that's that's a big mover and shaker. And of course, there's some actor who became a director who did some stuff in Star Wars named Jon Favreau, who might have played D&D as well, right? So he's a D&D player too.
That's what I was thinking of,
Yeah, Jon Favreau. Yeah, great. Yeah, the guy's amazing. I would love to be able to sit down and
100%.
I love the Mandalorian, man. He does such a great job with that. But yeah, sorry. But those just as Bruce says stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good point.
Likewise.
This, yeah. But for me now, honestly, growing up in the shadow of a parent who's known for doing something well in a space can be daunting when you're a young person trying to figure out who you are. And so, I had my teenage conflicts with my dad, and I decided, well, you know what? I really know I'm way smarter than you are, old man. Right? So I decided I was going to join the Army and do my own thing, and I don't need you, right? So I did that, and I thought I'd join for 2 years and go to college. I ended up staying in either the reserves or National Guard system or active duty for like 33 years and just retired last year.
Wow.
So I didn't do a whole lot of gaming, didn't work in the gaming space. I still did a little bit on the side, with helping out. I mean, gosh, I think my first writing credit was when I was 9 or something for Gamma World Legion of Gold. I just talked it through with my dad. Yeah.
Love Gamma World.
Yeah, Gamma World's great.
As a child, anyway. I mean, and still to this day, love it.
So fun. I love the idea that just the mutations and the cool stuff that you can do. I throw that into my world of Okrim as, there was this cataclysm, and then this chaos magic is out there. Great, I get to make mutated things. Yeah, it's great. So what a great excuse to have some science fantasy. But yeah, it's like my first writing credit, but I made up the Bullywug and some spells. I played character Melf and through adventuring in Castle Greyhawk, made up some spells. I worked with my brother Ernie at Margaret. Well, he was a general, like the manager at Margaret Weiss's hobby shop in Lake Geneva called the Game Guild. And 3rd edition had just come out, and she wanted the hobby shop to have a game going, right? Well, my brother was still running his old hobby shop dungeon in 1E days way back when. And he's like, man, I don't want to learn the system, but I need to make up some stuff. I was like, okay, well, we'll collaborate and I'll DM. And so I did. I came down and DM'd it there, and that became the Lost City of Gaxxworx, which it was really cool because my dad was still alive and he got to playtest and help us design it. So that was really a lot of fun because he'd be like, well, you should make some magic statues. They should do this stuff. And for me, I still remember this pretty vividly. He was playing Tempros Granger, who was basically like an old Roman, imperial guardian. And it had been pulled out of time and he'd come back, so et cetera. So anyway, but he was with the group. He'd rejoined them. He joined them and was trying to help, get the evil out of the city and that sort of stuff. And he fought some, I think it was an ogre, maybe it was a hill giant that had a magical tattoo. It was in one of the source books. You could have magic tattoos and it was able to breathe like acid once a day or something like that. So they defeated it, and he was searching the body and going over the trace. He's like, well, how was it breathing fire? I said, oh, it was a magical tattoo. He's like, oh, that's the worst. You're such a chintzy DM to be cheating me with magic. I was like, yes, yes, revenge for all those years. It was great. So that was so much fun. But yeah, he added a lot to Gaxxworx, and that was neat to be able to work with my dad in about 2000 or so. But then I went back active duty and was all over the place doing things, so I didn't get to do as much with him creatively. He passed away, and then through GaryCon, organizing that memorial, I thought, well, Dad really wanted me to do a lot of things with him, and I just started writing modules for the convention. What I sell 50 copies or 100, so it wasn't, I wasn't making any money on this, but it was fun, and I enjoyed the collaborative process because I worked with Jim Ward and Christopher Clark and Steve Chenault would print them, and all these guys worked with my dad, right? And I wrote with Jeff Talanian, who also worked on Castle Zagat with my dad. So it's really been like a really neat process for me to connect with people and to pay an homage to my dad and really feel, I guess cathartic, I guess that's the word that you would say. So that's how I got into the gaming space. And now that I'm retired, I figured, well, what the heck? What would be more apropos than doing, augmenting my income or making a living, quote unquote, working in publishing games. So that's what I'm doing, and I got my family doing it with me too, so it's great.
So where can people find your works now?
Sure. If you go to Gaxxworx, GaxxWorx.com, We have a humble little website. We're just getting started there. And of course, if you want to come to GaryCon, you can go to GaryCon.com, GaryCon.com. And GaryCon's coming up next month, a month from this show. So it's a little close right now to probably get there. Registration's already happened, but you're welcome to come, regardless, to Lake Geneva, birthplace of D&D, and be there. If not, plan for 2024. It's the 50th anniversary of D&D, and we're going to pull out all the stops and do some special stuff.
Oh, wow. Great.
Thanks. Before we take questions from the audience, I'd like to ask each one of you, what was the most influential piece of pop culture on your game style or your writing? Bruce, we'll start with you.
Pop culture. Well, so I guess we're coming up into the modern day as opposed to when I was younger, because that would have been various science fiction novels and stuff. So these days, right, I mean, the quality and caliber of shows on television in the last 10 years, I feel like I keep saying, this is peak TV, and then another year comes by, this is peak TV, right? And so just seeing the, I think these days I prefer the streaming shows that kind of have an arc and they occur over multiple different hours, you know, so it can be a 9-hour, 12-hour, 13-hour show. I would say things like, just more recently to mind, is the show The Last of Us. I mean, this is really, really recent, but I'm also writing a post-apocalyptic source book right now with mutations.
Oh, yes!
And seeing that show obviously has this, you know, sort of adventure-esque, we have a thing, we must travel to a place and we must overcome odds. But of course, the thing about the show is it's not really about the mycelial threat. It's about the character interaction, right? And I'm like, okay, you know, this is something that I need to really invest in my writing and plotting, right? Because this is important stuff, right? And you know, we always know that characters are important. Like Luke was saying, though, when you're younger, you're like, okay, and now the ogre does the thing, and that's important, you know. But then, you know, what's a character struggle or a character interaction that could also be important? So it's something I'm thinking about right now. So I don't know if that's the most important, but it's something that's kind of going through my head currently.
That's great. Thank you for that.
Yeah, it's a great question. Drawing a particular source would be difficult. I enjoy listening to audiobooks quite a lot, and I listen to some lit RPG of all things these days that, you know, kind of insert, like, somehow through some whatever, you know, suspension of belief, they're in a full VR world or get transported into a computer world, kind of like Tron, but, you know, cooler, right? Remember Tron? Or, gosh, was it Joel Rosenberg? Remember those?
Yeah, the Sleeping Dragon was the first one?
Yeah.
Yes.
The Joel Rosenberg where he
I read
gets
that
sucked
book
into
so many times.
Right, yeah. So
when I was a kid.
Yeah, right, and that was a big influence. That was early 80s, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, as well as David Eddings and Belgariad, those were cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, so lots of books, and obviously my dad is a huge influence on me, right? Because, you know, we just sit and rap about stuff, and he loved old sci-fi that was more sword and sorcery and pulpy, that was more action-oriented than story development-oriented. So that's why I think a lot of the earlier stuff was more, well, you're going to figure that out your own DM, right? But here's the stuff that you got to, you know, here's the main opponents you're going to defeat. A lot of the story development, and that was left up to you at the table. And now, obviously, there's been a big change in that, where I think when you're creating something, you want to think about not only the challenge to the players, but role play opportunities, and again, the whole story arc idea you have to have that. What are you doing? Because it's a call to adventure, right? And I think because people's tastes have matured and there's more great TV out there and more sources of entertainment besides just the gaming table to get your fantasy kick, people want more story, more interplay, more connectivity. And well, you know what? I guess we saw that in the G1. I don't know if you guys are familiar with some old modules. There was Against the Giants, which took you three modules that connected. Like, you're going, okay, well, man, there's all this raiding going on and stuff. These darn hill giants are causing some trouble. And you go, oh wait, they're working with the frost giants who are working with the fire. Well, that's weird. All these weird giants are working together. Wait a second. There's this weird new beings that are kind of pulling the strings here, and you go beneath the earth and you discover there's this whole race of subterranean elves, you know, that were banished, and they become evil demon worshippers of this spider god, and they're called the Drow. And And again, just to give you an idea, if you remember what happens to the Drow magic, which is super cool and kick ass, what happens to it as soon as you take it out into the sunlight? Bye-bye, right? Yeah, that's why I was celebrating when my dad didn't get anything for killing that ogre. Because my
Look at all
character
this
had
chainmail
all
I
this,
got, Elven chainmail.
yeah, I had all that cool stuff. I was like, yes, this rules. My character is gonna be awesome. Oh, you wake up the next day and it's all brittle. Man, I was like, God darn it. But in fairness, isn't part of the game finding a reason to keep you going, to keep the challenges running, right? Just like I think he pulled that out from like Conan novels and things like that. What always happened to Conan after he made a big score? He would be drinking and someone would rob him, right? And he's like, oh man, now I'm broke again. Now I have to go on some adventure. Because guess what? If you're fat and happy, there's no need to go adventuring, right? If you've got a big old pile of cash, why are you going to go fight a giant serpent or something, right? That's crazy. So just motivating your players to keep going, making them feel like they have impact, agency, and what they do is important in the world. Makes it way more complex as a designer because you got to go, if they do this, here's the larger story arc of things. Here's where they can impact it, right? So there's that larger story. Then maybe there's some smaller things they can do in their local area. So it's become much more complex, and you have to be pretty good story designer. So I'm nowhere near as good as this guy, but I'll keep.
Actually, I just picked up Okaram Eye of Shatufi Part 1, and I was reading through it. I was like, this is nice stuff. It's great stuff.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
And I saw the part where you had, like, hey, for some background music, do a search for this on YouTube. I'm like, that's clever.
Yeah.
Nice job.
That was. I owe that to Matt Everhart, my co-designer. So I got to give him credit. He's a great guy to work with. And I love the collaboration because for me, a lot of the joy is talking it through, right?
That's pretty awesome, actually. That's a good way to design, honestly.
Yeah.
I think more designers would benefit from that. Yeah. Myself included.
Yeah. But when you're doing it, and it's you really got to have that discipline to sit down and bang it out, right? And sometimes if you're
that's kind of been the benefit of my career is that I've had the ability, for whatever reason, the anxiety of failing, I guess, is to actually plan things out really, really well each day. And if I have a deadline, sorry, I'm getting off the topic here just briefly, but I will write this how many pages I have to write today, right? And I'll have the entire thing on a notebook, right? Page, and each page that I write, I can cross off and and at the end of that day, I have, I've written, 2,000, or I've written 4 pages, right? I'm like, I'm done for today. I don't have to worry about it again, right?
That's
and
nice.
It's been the way I've been able to
It's a good way
get
of doing
through
it.
everything.
Yeah.
And some of those check marks are like, think about this project for 2 or 3 days, right, before you start writing, outlining.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, but that's great.
Getting
And that's
off
backwards planning, which the Army teaches you, by the way. That's great. So you start with the end in mind and work your way back.
That's exactly it, yeah.
Thanks for not spoiling that adventure for my players.
Yeah.
So now, if someone in the audience has a question, I'm going to ask that you come front and center. We have someone holding the mic here for you so that everyone can hear.
You guys can go ahead and just get in line. Yes. That'd probably be the easiest.
Hey guys, thanks so much for being here. How can we as gamers best support young generations of gamers and future generations of gamers?
By buying my stuff, clearly, is the best way to do that. I'd say back all my Kickstarters at the maximum. Supporting young designers and things like that, I guess it would be when you come to conventions, walk around, see who's demoing their stuff, see who are the folks in the new new artist or new designer hallway, chat with them, check out their websites, maybe pick up some of their PDFs if you can't make a big investment or whatever it is. Give them a little encouragement, play the game. Because I mean, gosh, it's easy. There's a lot of people who love this. It's not easy to do well, but it is very easy to get lost in the mix of so many things. So if you find somebody whose stuff you like, use it, support them, give them a pat on the back, and tell your friends so that if they may also like it, this person can A, stay motivated, and B, maybe have some resources to be able to keep doing it.
So yeah, for the young gamers, if it's someone like it's in your own life, right? If you want to start them particularly young, there are a few games out there that you can buy that are specifically designed. And to toot our own horn, MCG has a game that's pretty popular called No Thank You Evil, and it kind of starts off by stripping away all the complexity, and because our characters are basically 3 different basically, it strips it away to just a small thing for the younger, and you can add more and more complexity. And one of the things that you do in the game is you help another player with one of your stats. And another thing you do is like, no thank you, Evil, I don't want this, this is too scary for me, right? So that's if it's in your own particular thing. For people who are outside of your particular realm, I'm not sure. I guess create videos or that kind of thing.
Do reviews.
Yeah,
right?
do reviews,
Isn't that nice? Yeah.
put that stuff out. The kids these days do watch a lot of YouTube and TikTok and that kind of thing. So our company, one thing we also do for young designers is we have an intern program, and we've had like 5 or 6 interns now, I believe. And at least one of them has gone on to a game design career. So,
Good.
the others hopefully will do whatever they want to do, of course, but.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, anytime you can just play games and encourage young people to play games and have fun with them at a convention or something, have a kids game, have a kids track. What's great through GaryCon is I've seen, and even the Game Guild, guys who were 8, 10, 12, now they're adults, they bring their kids to play at GaryCon, which is cool.
So he's saying, reproduce, have kids, teach them the game.
Yes, that is a method. This is a good method. This works. I do it with my daughters. They all play, and they like it. But yeah, it was so cool. It was like GaryCon 4. It's now GaryCon 15 coming up. But it was like a 13-year-old boy and a table full of all 13 or younger kids playing, because they'd been coming since GaryCon 1 with their parents. That was the first game that he ran for like all kids, and now I see them all in college and stuff, and some of them are running Dungeon Crawl Classics as DMs at a bunch of conventions and things like that. So it's really neat to see that arc, and the love be passed on to the next generation. So just foster that, give kids a chance to play, and guess what? I think they'll enjoy it. So, yeah, sorry. It's pretty obvious.
Well, I'm already doing that, so
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My question might be too personal or emotional triggering, but what is a character that you've had that is maybe prominent in your mind that it was an emotional death, gory death, or a surprising death that you might have had in the game, or any game? Do you have something? I mean, there might be too many, but
I've had characters that have died in surprising ways, and I don't think since I was a kid has it been an emotional death. But so here's a you didn't ask humorous, but so I was in a game a weeknight at Wizards of the Coast for many years, several different ones actually, but this one was run by Chris Perkins, and one night I couldn't show up. I was running a warlock character, and it was actually one of my favorite characters, actually. I wrote a lot about warlocks in 3rd and 4th edition, so this character was kind of like the playtest character of a lot of the warlock material that I wrote. And I was unable to make it one night, and I came back the next day, and I heard the story of what had happened, and they said, yeah, your character wasn't there, but then this person showed up, and they had a bag, and they threw the bag at our feet, and your head rolled out. And so he'd killed me off stage. And I was like, Chris, you... So that was slightly traumatic. Now that I'm telling the story, I'm realizing, there's a little animosity there that I'd forgotten about.
That was not the nicest thing to have done. There's some other ways.
But everyone else thought it was hilarious. I was, anyway.
Yeah. So mine was terrible, and I was a kid at the time. So it was a Tomb of Horrors horror story of all things. So I just wanted to play D&D one night. Not 1980, 81, so I'm 10, 11 years old, something like that. Maybe a little younger, but anyway. And my sister Heidi was still around, so yeah, it was probably 1980 or something. And so he's like, yeah, sure. We sat down in the den and we started playing. And he took my character, my 10th level ranger, and my sister's character, Murphles, who was much lower level, into the Tomb of Horrors. I had no idea what Tomb of Horrors was, of course. I'd never played it. And I ended up going through a misty portal where all of my stuff was teleported to a Sarah rack at the end, and I was naked at the front of the thing. I was like, all right, so I kept exploring around. Well, I found my way into a small 10 by 10 room with some levers, if I remember correctly, and I pushed the levers up, which I think makes the floor drop, if I remember correctly, and it's a 100-foot pit, right? Of course, all my stuff was gone, so there was no ring of feather fall or anything that I could have had. So I hit the ground, but I had 115 or 117 hit points. I mean, I was 10th level ranger back in the day at 18 con. But yeah, so I survived, but I'm at the bottom of a pit, naked, in the Tomb of Horrors. That was the end of that. That was the end of that career.
That's sad.
It was. It was my first character. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So if I could follow up on that.
Yeah.
From your memory of Tomb of Horrors, because
Sure.
you've run it, you've played it.
Sure.
Who was the first player to say, well, I touch it again?
I don't know. I just I know that my dad designed it with Rob Kuntz in mind, who was one of the early players and his co-DM for Greyhawk Castle for many years. And he played a character named Robilar, who
Lord Robilar.
Yeah, who probably started off. I think he started off as a good character, and then he changed to chaotic evil. But he would keep like all sorts of had subdued an army I switched it around orc army at some point, and so he would use orcs kind of as the cannon fodder in front of him to help clear dungeons, particularly of pits. And so Robilar did make it all the way through successfully, but my dad said, well, and Rob never mapped. Which is in that day was a big deal because that was part of the challenge was mapping and the puzzle there. But he had a system of how he would go through things, right? In his mind, very bright guy. And so my dad designed each one of those pit traps with Rob in mind, and he said there was a dead orc in every pit. So he figured that was like success, right? So, yeah. So anyway, Rob was I think the first guy who made it through Tomb of Horrors.
I also died in Tomb of Horrors first time I ever played it, by the way. Right through, me and 3 other people just right through that devil mouth because we were convinced it was a portal. We put a rod in, a staff, and we're like, well, nothing happens. Do we pull it back out? No, just like, we throw it in. Oh no, it goes in. Okay, we all go in. Okay, roll up new characters. That was that.
You have that tattoo, don't you?
Yes, I do.
It's a great tattoo, yeah.
So for context, I used to work with kids who had learning difficulties and behavior issues, and back then I kind of hit on just using D&D for it, and it was actually massively successful with what I was doing. And I later found out that people were using it for mental health and for teaching and stuff. So I was wondering if I got to get to a question, right? I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts on kind of practical uses for D&D and teaching mental health and so on, if you've encountered anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there is a great benefit to it. I'm not trained as a counselor in any way, so I can't speak specifically to it. But my understanding is that I know it's used. I've invited and talked to people who use it and that it's beneficial in role playing because again, you get outside of yourself. You get to rehearse strategies of how you could act in certain situations. You maybe get an opportunity to be set in a position where there's maybe it's you get to reenact some stressful events. Be able to assert yourself successfully and overcome those obstacles. And so that gives you confidence in your abilities. And I think that can be helpful to a lot of people. Just anecdotally, I always thought D&D was a great game. And I know a lot of unusual folks were attracted to it in the early days, right? A lot of nerds and stuff, right? And and a lot of them were pretty shy, but we get around the table, it was all good. Well, of course, I learned later, after my father passed away, he was no longer there for people to talk to him, they'd talk to me. And I've heard so many stories about how Dungeons and Dragons, and role-playing in general, positively impacted their life, whether they were incredibly shy, they were suffering, something it could be a divorce, maybe alcoholism or drug use in the family, death of a parent, a learning disability. But Dungeons and Dragons gave them motivation and a support network in the folks around the table to help them deal with that situation and overcome it. And now they are a doctor, a lawyer, they met their wife and they've been married 30 years, they have lifelong buddies that they game with every week. Whatever the situation is, there's just this great bond that they've had. So, and obviously Wounded Warrior Project is something that one of the charities we support through GaryCon, and they have a Project Odyssey, I believe is what their program is called, where they specifically get veterans with PTSD together and, treat, have kind of like a group therapy almost type stuff using role-playing games to do that. And I think that's very positive. I know other folks are doing it too.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in addition to you, right, I know of at least a couple different charities. It's It's not called Save or Die, but it's called Save or something like that. And a couple other places that I know that people are, I think I even saw one over here now I'm thinking about it, that, are out there doing that sort of thing for disadvantaged youth, stuff like that. There's other programs where they will have kids come and play D&D on like a Friday night or something like that, just to kind of bring kids in so they have something to do rather than necessarily go out and raise hell, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's definitely, in the same way it's helped help me, help so many people I know create friendships, and it's good the more you can get out there, the more it's going to help people, I think, for the most part.
But the youth part's important because before the pandemic, some folks at Wisconsin Children's Hospital were, they're connected to Extra Life, and so I was talking to them, and they said, well, somebody suggested we get together, teach our counselors how to DM, a game, so that our at-risk youth groups can meet, and we're hoping that when they hit 18, they'll want to stay connected, right? Because a lot of them fall off apparently, and once they hit the age of adulthood, there's not as many services available to them, and they can get in trouble and go astray. And so I was like, yeah, that's great. And then of course the pandemic hit and turnover. So I'm trying to re-establish that because we're supporting Children's Wisconsin Foundation at GaryCon this year, and I'm going to take that opportunity. We're having some kids come and play virtually. Just a lot of them are sick, so they can't come in person. But then I really want to get their at-risk youth program going, playing D&D, because I think it's not going to be the counselors that they stay connected to. It's going to be each other that they're going to stay connected to, and that's going to be their best support network when you're down and you need a hand. You got your buddies that you can call, and I think that's really important.
And just to follow up on that, it's the in-person thing. We always thought for years now, video games are going to kill D&D. And why it doesn't? It's because the in-person interaction, right, is so important, and that's where you make your friends. And as we learned during the pandemic, I'm sure many of us tried to keep up games over Zoom. It just wasn't the same, I didn't think anyway, and I don't think a lot of people did. So yeah, the fact that we can now get back together again in person is going to be a great benefit to everyone once more.
It's better than not at all. But it's
better than not at all.
It's better than not at all.
You're right. I don't mean to say don't play games on Zoom.
Yeah, I'd much rather be in person. Yeah, I don't play it on Zoom now. Yeah.
Taking it out of context.
Bruce Cordell said it's time to get back in the office.
Yes, it's his fault. Blame this guy.
So on topic of how D&D affects culture and everything, so we've seen this resurgence of TTRPG, especially, not to say that it ever went away, but it's especially in pop culture, it's a resurgence via the D&D movies, fantasy, Marvel, Critical Role, all this other stuff that has become, now it's inserted itself more into the spotlight of pop culture, and has become more, I don't want to say accessible, but just more
pervasive?
Yeah, pervasive, perceptive to like the population as a whole, especially like, nerds that were like, oh, this is really, really cool. I mean, Legend of Vox Machina on Prime Video, that whole thing, being like people who've never played D&D are watching stuff like that and getting into these fantasy genres and understanding all this stuff. So what do your instincts tell you with this as far as this? Is this common with culture when it comes like in waves and then it recedes and then it comes back? Or like, are your instincts telling you like, okay, this could possibly, the risk of using the idiom, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain type of thing, where it's like, oh, okay, and then we step away from it, and then maybe 30, 40, 50 years later it comes back with like a new thing, and then what are we expecting, or like other than creating a bunch of spawn and then teaching your little goblins how to play with click-clacks, how do we then try to positively affect the pop culture to keep it, because it's such a great community and we want it to keep going, and we don't want it to be that fad that just becomes part of the pop culture and then we move on to the next thing. I know that's a big question, I'm sorry.
I think the great thing about role-playing games is that even if a corporation tries to completely control it, it's hard for them to do so, right? I think we saw an example of that happen recently.
Was there something recently?
Maybe. And even if that had gone through, it wouldn't have affected the ability of people to play RPGs. So I think it's become such a texture of our pulp culture, in my opinion. Like, I could be wrong, but like the Beatles, still around, right? I mean, and the Beatles is just listening something. This is an active thing that people do, and I think mostly for good, probably sometimes for ill, but mostly for good, it's going to stick around and not necessarily, like you said, see our heroes fail or whatever the quote you used.
See yourself live long enough to see yourself become a villain.
Oh, become the villain. Yes. No, I mean, I don't think so. As far as RPGs as a concept goes, that's my opinion.
I think it'll persist simply because it's kind of hardwired into us to want to be around other people, and people have told stories around the fire for forever and ever, right? So story is important, connecting with your friends, and this is better than watching TV or a movie or whatever, because you get to help dictate what's going on. You are participating in the storyline, right? So it's much more personal for you. I love stories and watching TV and all that. It's great, and reading books, but it's different and it's more social, and I think that'll stick around unless there's maybe some really good immersive AI stuff where you can.
It's as good as being here right now, right?
Yeah.
Would have to be that good.
Yeah, I don't know. But I always throw that caveat. I don't know
Yeah,
for
you
sure,
never
but
know.
I think.
Or a human race goes extinct.
Yeah, that's right. And then Terminator. Right?
Yeah.
We do have a good line here, so I'm going to cut the questions off at Curtis, our favorite Smash brother. Just in interest of time for everybody's
Sure.
Makes sense.
schedules, because here at GenghisCon, everybody is on the schedule, I know.
Because I think we have one more hour, right? 10 minutes. So we have one more hour.
Oh, we do
Oh, I
have
thought
an
it was
hour.
1 hour.
I thought it was 1 hour,
There's
too.
1 hour in my schedule.
I don't know if we
So-
can talk that long. You want to talk
Yeah.
that long? Today?
No, I think
I'm willing to go longer. if
Yeah,
we need-
these gentlemen have questions, and we'll,
Yeah, for sure.
We're going to try to wind.
I can
down with
talk.
final
I can
questions.
talk forever. Dude. Just put a quarter in.
There's coffee over there.
Exactly. I got coffee. So the next 4, I don't go out until 7 o'clock tonight. So we got plenty of time, folks.
I
My
have
daughter will
a,
love working the booth alone again.
I have a
Sorry.
mechanics question.
Okay.
I started with Holmes when I was 13
Okay.
and maybe 12. And I never understood the declaration phase of a turn where the DM you'd be in an encounter and then everybody declared what they were going to do.
I haven't done that in a long
and
time.
then it was executed. Was that ever actually at tables?
Yeah, absolutely. So sure. So Dr. J.R. Holmes basically looked at OD&D. He's like, man, I love this game, but it's not really well organized. So he said, let me take a whack at this, Gary. And it's like, sure. So that he kind of reorganized rules, boiled down lots of stuff, and came up with that basic D&D set, which was the J.R. Holmes version. A lot of people were introduced to it that way, of course. I played with my dad and went AD&D, kind of morphed more into, from OD&D to AD&D. But the declarations phase was pretty easy. Or I can explain to you why that is. Wargamers,
So I was going to guess.
tactics, right? Simultaneous actions going on. Okay, so a melee round back in those days was 1 minute. A segment was 6 seconds. Okay? What are you doing? I'm going to cast a spell. Okay, great. That spell's 5 segments. I'm going to attack. I'm going to do whatever. Okay, great. If you got hit, if damage happened to you during that spell casting, guess what? Spell's gone, bro. Yeah. What if you're like, oh crap, I really don't want to throw a dagger. I want to throw hold person or whatever. I guess you wouldn't have a dagger if you're a clerk. But instead of doing whatever, I'm going to throw hold person, that person. You're now trying to kind of insert metagame in there. You were doing this, and it's kind of happening. You don't have time to digest all that. So it was really strategize, get your tactics down. What are you doing? There could be consequences that interrupt your spell, and that was devastating because if your spell gets interrupted, it's crossed off, right? And that may be the only one of those that you have because it's a Vancian magic system. So does that help?
Yes.
Okay.
I never understood the rule, and we never did it.
That's why. It's just so you can.
And I thought it was.
That's okay. Yeah, that's no problem. But yeah, I think it's a wargaming.
Holdover.
It was punitive.
Yeah, it was a different style of play.
It's trying to evoke reality, and like wargaming does, right? And it was, very earnest attempt. I played once or twice that way, but I do appreciate the kind of more fluid, faster paced way role playing has gone since then.
Boo-boo on my arm there.
Ouch.
Yeah. I scraped my arm a while ago and it's not healing. My Band-Aid came off. Sorry about that.
What TV show or movie did you see, maybe watch, that sort of had maybe some unique or different thing from D&D that you maybe didn't normally would expect from that TV show or movie? Some aspect or something that sort of surprised you?
That it was a D&D base movie or?
Something that was from the D&D culture.
There's nothing that leaps to
I
mind.
mean, anytime, these days, I guess it's not as surprising, but when I was younger, anytime there was a reference to D&D, that was always surprising. It was like, hey, so I didn't know anything about Stranger Things. Of course, now we all know everything about it if we've watched it, but, when it jumped into that whole, like, we're going to take these monsters out of the monster manual and just use them in this show, I was like, okay then. And then they just were able to use that as a guide. I was just thinking, okay, this is how we're going to frame it. But no, I mean, it was framing it, but yeah, it's kind of surprised me at how they've kind of stuck to that kind of method, even in the last shows. Yeah, that surprised me, and in a good way.
What's interesting, and you're right, I just found this really neat, and some people said D&D has helped you, I don't know, categorize monsters and give them, specify what they do. You've defined the monsters. Because if you think about it, in myth, a kobold could be this huge thing, or a goblin, right? And you're like, what's a kobold? It's this little guy who runs around, one half a hit die, it's not that big of a deal.
Meatballs.
Right, yeah. And so it's defined all these things, and then people use that in their references and games and stuff. So that's a thing.
Great to talk to you guys. It's really cool to be able to talk to a couple of lifelong creators. I was going to see if you could each give an example of like a pet creation or one of your stories, something that you kind of keep going back to even after, I imagine you guys just typing away at your keyboards, continuing to create stuff, but when you have a chance to reflect, is there a story or a character or backstory that you each kind of come back to a lot and just can't kind of get away from, or you're like, oh yeah, that was good, that was some of my best stuff? Curious to see.
I'd really like to thank you, Chad, for bringing the thunder. Not necessarily stealing it, but that is one of my questions as well.
Yeah, I mean, for me, probably I haven't done I don't have nearly as large of a body of work as Bruce does, but probably the most I'm most proud of that's out there. I think my stuff in my new world in Quorum is going to be better, but Velocity of Gaxxworx brought a lot of joy to people, and it's been around for 20 years, and people still play it. They still have fun. We translated it into 5th edition. It was very popular, and just providing the setting with personalities and giving new, especially now, giving players more of a sandbox feel, which I think oftentimes, and as Bruce had said, you're writing storylines and story arcs and things like that. Sometimes that can funnel, if you're not really, really good and careful, you can tend to put people almost on tracks where they have to hit certain things. So in Gaxxworx, it was more like Yojimbo. You're just in this place with competing factions, and you can ally with them, you can use them against each other, you can just, if you straight up try to fight everybody there, you're gonna have a hard time, because it takes you from level 1 to level 10, so you have to use some tactics and thinking, just the amount of freedom that allows the GM to use in whatever system you're gonna run it. That's been a lot of fun, and I've heard a lot of nice stories and fun stories about ways people approach it, and honestly, hearing the way people approach stuff that you created is often a lot of fun, because you may not have thought, in fact, oftentimes you haven't thought of that way of defeating the challenge you put in front of people. So
true. Yeah, it's kind of hard to say. I guess I'll say that I've kind of had a couple different phases of my career, and so I'll do the more recent stuff, and then I'll have another example. So more recently, some of the things I think about, I'll see on my shelf, and I'll pull off. I'll be like, I did a source book called Gods of the Fall, which is basically the world has fallen into darkness and broken like 40 years ago because heaven fell and smashed on the earth, and things pretty much went to hell. And the heroes, the characters play these characters that have this little kindling of a divine spark, and they're slowly trying to rise up and make things better, and become gods of a new, better world, hopefully. And the art in that book is amazing, and I don't know, I just really love it. I did a superhero book called The Origin recently that kind of mixes X-Files and superheroes, right? And really love that. I don't know. And these are things that I've written lots of things. And one more thing, I'll just say, The Stars Are Afire pretty recently, which is a science fiction sorting helps you create your own science fiction setting. Now, back in the old TSR days and moving on, I kind of had this thing I would do, which is create this hidden storyline that would connect kind of all my products secretly. And that kind of started with my very first product, Gates of Fire and Storm Peak, where I said, let's bring secretly, or not so secretly, the Cthulhu mythos into D&D, and I called it the Far Realm, right? And I said there is this place outside of time and space called the Far Realm, kind of this nebulous sort of amoebic sort of world, and that's where humans, if they pass through, they would come out, oh, that's how Mind Flayers came about, you know, these sorts of things that I was just kind of reimagining. And the Far Realm kind of, and characters that interacted with the Far Realm kind of went all through my early second and third edition products, and that actually sort of culminated in a novel series I wrote called Plague of Spells, City of, God, I can't even remember the name of these things now because it's a little while ago, and City of Stars, and anyway, is called the Abolithic Sovereignty. And so that was kind of something that, I don't think about anymore, but, since you made me go back and think about it, it's like, yeah, that was really fun. I should have done that in my most recent 10 years and connect everything secretly, but I didn't. Yeah. Oh well.
Cthulhu is always good. I have Cthulhu in Okram too. They're trying to get in there and eat the world. That's part of the
I noticed the Aboleth,
Abuleth. It's like, Abu is father of, right? So Abuleth.
Yeah, no.
He's not an Aboleth.
New pronunciation note for everyone there.
Yeah.
So obviously over the course of now almost 50 years of D&D, the game has changed a lot, it's evolved, and over your guys' writing careers, I'm sure you've been influenced by a lot of outside sources and have changed and evolved your writing. I'm curious to see, what do you think the biggest change in either the game or your writing has been, and what sort of influences you're trying to instill into the game now to maybe push it forward and change the way it's played now for the future?
I kind of go back and forth because there's sometimes that I really appreciate if I'm writing an adventure, really organizing it super well with like bold headers and you see this, you hear this, and sometimes I fall away from that, and then sometimes I'm like, what the hell, why aren't I making this sort of very clear sort of organizational thing, so as the GM, if I'm picking up an adventure, I can kind of look and scan and get, the most relevant things. So I kind of go back and forth on that. And then I'm always trying to make my writing clearer, more present tense, more, just trying to make it as succinct as possible without losing the descriptive stuff. So there's a fine balance between active description but you want some of that. You want to give the GM some of that, but sometimes you need to, just make it a little more, synthesize it down to the most important and essential. So that's what I'm trying to do. And as far as making things different, I think the things were pretty good back in the day, and as long as we can strive to, create, new stories, but, every story has various elements that come together. They just come together differently.
Yeah, so it's, you hear, oh, that's, those old modules are tropey. Well, yeah,
because
it's because they created the trope, right? that's why. Yeah, so that's neat. So obviously the style has changed a whole lot. In the beginning, there was a lot more wargame influence. It was more combat oriented. There was less scripted, or not scripted, expected role play. That was more on the side of the dungeon crawl, right? You'd still go out in the village and you have to talk to people who are there, and maybe you're trying to get some assistance from them or whatever it is, right? Or there's an ecology with, if you brought magic in there or things, you would influence that setting as well. But the focus was really more typically combat oriented, and sometimes there'd be various puzzles and traps and things to figure out, but maybe less story arc. Again, we saw that introduced a bit in some of those Greyhawk adventures where you'd get a paragraph about what was going on in the setting, and there was a gazetteer and things of that nature, so you'd start seeing the kernels of that developing. Clearly that was popular. People liked it. And it's become more pervasive. The game itself, through rule systems, I think has become less complex. It's lost some of its, I affectionately call it wonkiness. Things like mapping are not important anymore. Nobody maps, right? They want to be shown the terrain or shown a map. So that's less of a device that's used. And there's more of a reliance on having a particular skill in making a die roll versus describing to the GM what's going on. Or at least I see that more often. I'm not saying it's 100%. I think it's nice to be able to, it is nice to have those skills because it does help shape, you don't have to make up everything as the GM. So I think that's where I've seen some of the changes, and it's much less lethal in many game systems now. So there's less character death. You can have setbacks, right? But I think there's more of an aversion to like just crushing your character. You know, you fell in the pit, you're dead. Ha ha. You know, there's less of that. And I don't know, is that bad or good? I think you do need to have tension in the game. If there's no dramatic tension, are you going to watch a TV show? Probably not, right? And you may get bored as a player if it becomes too easy for you, right? That's more, even superheroes have trouble, right? You know, Superman had to face kryptonite, right? He had to figure it out, and he's pretty badass. So I think there's been a pendulum swing that way. It'll probably come back to adding a little bit more complexity in some areas and adding a little bit more, you know, lethality or consequences that way so people stay interested. But I think on the positive end, some of those changes of simplicity and kind of more smooth, equal power of all various classes has helped the entry, people enter into the game, and that's a good thing. So that's really good. We have more people playing D&D and role-playing games in general than ever before. So it's hard to argue with success, right? That's what I would say.
Just to piggyback on that, I mean, the way that the game has opened itself up to, well, women. You know, when I was in the 80s, right? And we actually tried to get girls to play in our game, and I guess it was just still too weird anyway. But I know many people who play now who are like, yeah, I tried to play back then, but you know, boy, you know, they don't have me. And of course, the diversity beyond that itself, right, is just I appreciate very much that we can. That's why we have 40 million people playing D&D now, rather than 1 million or 2 million or.
D&D is the appeal of D&D is human.
Yeah,
is what we can say. Yeah. And yeah, I experienced the same thing. I didn't have not nearly as many female gamers, and it's great to see. And
LGBTQA, the whole, everything, right? Just bring people in from all walks of life, and we can all play D&D.
I think there was
RPGs and all of it. D&D.
In RPGs in general.
D&D is. I don't want to make D&D. The cleaning. It is its thing, but it kind of is like when you say D&D, it's people think RPGs. Right?
Yeah, it's like saying Coke. I
guess, right? It kind of is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Coca-Cola.
Yeah. right. Yes. There you go. I think I really think there was a lot of LGBTQ in D&D from the beginning. It's just that you didn't talk about it. Right, you didn't talk about it because it was a different time.
Yeah.
In the 70s, you didn't advertise that, right? It was more of a taboo. So, but yeah, some of the early folks playing D&D.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah.
So as we wind through our last 10 minutes, one of the questions that I definitely wanted to ask, and I hope I don't spoil your answer by saying, one of the most pervasive rules that either of you put into the game, that got into the writing, and has just lived on throughout. So when 2nd edition D&D went through its first change, they went to the Black Books, and the first module that came out was the Gates of Firestorm Peak. The institution of the reach rule, where if you ran up on something and it just spiked you over the top of a wall, maybe, spoiler alert, Gates of Firestorm Peak has giants in it, creatures that grow big. Anyway,
Duergar that grow giant size.
Giant size, and they reach over a wall and stab you down. I've seen that rule carried out through many iterations of not only D&D, but other games. But what rule that you have instituted, or that was instituted because of your play in the game, has been pervasive throughout every edition and other game systems?
So when it comes to Gates of Firestorm Peak, I didn't write that rule. They said, hey, we're coming out with players options, and we would like you to write a module that includes that. I'm like, how many people use players options, right? Some people, but not everyone who plays D&D. So what I did is I wrote an adventure, and then at the end I had bullet points. If you're using players options, these 2 bullet points apply to this encounter, right? So that way everyone in the world could, and if you weren't using players options, you could ignore those 2 bullet points or whatever. It may not make a difference. But anyway, I guess as far as mechanics go, I've done a lot of things that have story elements that have persisted up and even through 5th edition, way back then. But
Like the Far Realm.
like the Far Realm, Demogorgon, having two brains that fight each other, various things like that. I mean, he had two heads, of course. But
Yeah, it's another classic. Demogorgon. I love the guy.
Yeah. Anyway, but I guess the rule that I really hated was being turned to stone instantly, and then sitting there and going, "Oh man, I hate this," right? And so I think it started coming around at the end of 3rd edition and into 4th edition, which is like you slowly get turned to stone. So you make one save. Oh, I can't move very fast, right? Oh, make another save. Okay, now you turn to stone, right? And it was either 2 or 3 saves, right? And that was through 4th edition. That's in 5th edition. That's in Cypher System. So I feel like that was me saying, "Come on, we need to actually make this a little easier to be like," or or killed instantly, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's very old school. The save or die.
yeah,
I was
save or
running-
die.
I was running two
Mine is
horrors and I was
save
like,
save
what?
twice or die.
I'm dead? No,
Yeah.
you're dead. You're dead. Really? Like, no. It just happens right away. Yeah.
I can't say that I'm the only one who was postulating for this sort of rule change, but I certainly was one of the most vocal in my mind.
I don't think I made any rule changes. I probably influenced some just through
Oh,
gameplay.
sure you did.
Yeah, but I don't remember a specific off the top of my head. But I can give you a spell that stuck around in the rules for a while, and tell you how it came about. So I was playing Melf. Otis died in the bottom of a pit in Tomb of Horrors, right? So poor young me. I made up another character, and I was fighter magic user, elven fighter magic user, going through Castle Greyhawk. Did a lot of solo adventuring, which fighter magic user, right? It's good combo. But it would oftentimes, in the dungeon, this was very common. You would have some sort of spellcaster, right, in the back, like maybe your evil high priest, your evil sorcerer, and some meat shields. Pick any, zombies, kobolds, goblins, orcs, whatever it was, right? And so the spellcaster would do terrible things to you while you were engaged with the meat shields, and of course you can't cast, because if you get hit, spell's gone, right? So that's why you had to declare what you're doing and then roll initiative, right? Oh, I'm going to magic missile that guy. Okay. Oh, I lost initiative. Guess what? Your magic missile's gone, and you're done, right? So, and that's what you were doing that round. So you don't get to fight either. So that was part of the deal. And people, generally now, I think your players would lynch you up if you tried that. So please don't try that. You'll be labeled a killer DM and not a nice guy. But that was frustrating to me. I was like, man, I don't like this. So, because I wanted to, oftentimes I have my longbow out or whatever when I'm adventuring. I try to shoot an arrow before, but
Wasting a spell.
Right before, right. But shooting a bow in combat also would be very challenging, right? So I was like, man, maybe I can affix, some sort of like acid or something that would burn for a long time, right? So, and if you take even just a little bit of damage, you can't cast. So like, yeah, you can't really figure that out mechanically. But if you want to research it, so I was like, okay. So I went and I researched and described what I wanted to do, and it was a great way for my dad to take away money that I had acquired, right, to keep me hungry, right? So I had to spend a few thousand gold pieces, which is a lot for like a 4th level character. And so I gave up like all my cash and spent time out of game, and we developed the mechanics for the Melf's acid arrow. And that's the purpose there, so you can cast that spell quickly on the spellcaster in the back, have time to defeat the meat shields in front, and then when you get hand to hand with that caster, they don't stand a chance, right?
I had no idea that Melf's acid arrow was yours. That's awesome. So
Yeah.
Melf was your character.
Melf was my
presumably.
character, yeah.
That's did not know.
So same in minute meteors, you can probably figure out how that happened as well. What does every spellcaster want at 5th level? Every wizard, every magic user. Fireball, right? Fireball, yes, fireball. So, and I'd been around for minutes, so I knew what 30-foot radius or 30-foot, I think it's 30 foot back in the day. Was it always 20 feet? Anyway, I'm adventuring in there. I'd gotten the spell. I'd had to buy it off of the guy who taught me, because you had to get training to go up each level and spend golden time on that, right? But I did it, and I got Fireball, and I rolled successfully. I could memorize it. I could learn the spell, all the little wonky parts of AD&D. And I'm down, and so I open the door to whatever random room it is, and there's an ogre in the room. Might even been 2 ogres. And it was like either 30 by 30 or 40 by 40 room. So I knew it was big enough, right? So I'm like, yes, I want initiative, Fireball. Guess what I learned about that day? Volume. I learned about volume. The ceiling was not 30 feet high. And I was incensed when he's like, okay, great, roll your damage. All right, roll a saving throw. What do you mean roll a saving throw? But you're in the line. No, I'm not. Everyone's doing that. Finally, I was like, oh, man. And back in the day, if you remember the rules, if you failed your save, which I did, you took the full damage and everything on your character sheet had to roll a save. So you could lose magic items that way. I think I lost a scroll or a potion or something. Right? So I was like, that's BS. All right, Dad, we need to change this. Why can't I throw like lots of little fireballs? It's like, okay, well, we can talk about that. Let's do it. And there you went. So
that's great. Yeah. So Melf's Acid Arrow, we'll look that up.
Along the same lines of Melf's Minute Meteors.
Yeah.
Melf's Minute Meteors.
Yeah.
That was the resulting thing was Melf's Minute Meteors.
Yeah. So those all came out of gameplay. Yeah, those are real things. Tensor's floating disk. My brother's character was Tensor, and when you look at the old treasure types, if you remember way back, right? In the back is a monster manual. It has A through Z, right? So you'd get thousands of pieces of something, right?
How are you going to carry that?
How are you going to carry all that out, right? Because a backpack can hold like 200 coins, right? And then, you're encumbered. You can't get it out. And you can never go back. It will never be there. As soon as you step out of that room, it's like gone, right? So my brother made a spell that was just basically a big old donkey or something. It was just floating disc. You pile all the goodies on there and get it out of the dungeon. So
I'll wrap this up with one final question for each of you. What is your current work in progress, and where can we find it? Two websites to find what you're working on, or what you have available now, and what you're working on. What's under the hood?
Okay. Yeah, for me it's pretty easy. I'm working on part 3 of the Shintufi series, or the Oculus Senraba. So the Fate of Shintufi will be kickstarted at GaryCon. We're gonna kick that off, and Matt and I will get that wrapped up. The next thing we're working on, it's kind of working on it right now. It takes a bit longer. Is Strange and Grim, which is a diesel punk setting, and we are using the Everyday Heroes rule system, which is from Evil Genius Games, kind of a take on D20 Modern, but for 5e. And they didn't have a spellcasting component, so we're having to kind of go through and work a spellcasting component along with their developers to get that done. But hopefully that'll be out prior to the end of the year. I'm hoping in fall we'll be able to kickstart that along with like a little intro adventure and things of that nature. And that's what I have currently out is just a couple things that are available either on Gaxxworx.com digitally. You can get digital copies of my Okra modules. Kind of a cool story. My friend Chris Zeffro, since I've known since 9th grade, we met playing D&D, of course. He started a company. He always loved Fangoria, so he started a Halloween mask company called Trick or Treat. I thought he was insane when he quit his job in tech to do that. But it's become quite successful, and now he makes board games, and I was the first. He's distributing my modules as his first role-playing stuff. So they're out there in the wild if you want to grab those. Otherwise, I still have a few things up on Drive-Thru-RPG as well. Just search Gygax and you can find it there. And again, I mentioned GaryCon. Do that every year in March. So if you want to come to GaryCon, you can go to our website, GaryCon.com, or simply type play.GaryCon.com, and it'll point you towards our latest tabletop.events site, which is what Donnie here uses for GenghisCon as well.
Let's see. So I guess something recently that I worked on is Path of the Planebreaker, which is kind of like homage to Planescape, but with both 5e rules and Cypher System rules. And that's a source book about this cursed moon that's hurtling through the universe, smashing through one dimension at a time, and it's fleeing some curse from the previous universe. And it's kind of created this scar across the planes called the Path of the Planebreaker, and it's a way you can travel the planes. Nice. And that kind of comes with a bestiary, and it comes with a player's options book. And so that has both new 5th edition subclasses and CS that has new foci. If you're familiar with Cypher System, we kind of did all those translations. And, players' options, DM's options, adventures. So that's something that came out. Right now, we just actually wrapped up a Kickstarter. Actually, it's a backer kit, but it's a crowdfunding campaign Friday, 2 days ago, That was a kind of a cipher system, welcome to the cipher system, people who are suddenly weirdly interested in other options, and it was a pretty popular crowdfunding campaign. And one of the books is a setting for a post-apocalyptic, and basically we have a series of books that basically we give you all the different options we can think of for you creating your own setting. We have a science fiction one I talked about, The Stars Are Fire, many other genres, and this one's going to be a post-apocalyptic setting, and that's what I'm working on right now. And that and all the other things that I've written in the last 10 years you can find on montecookgames.com. If you're interested in all the various 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th edition things I've worked on, and the novels that I've written, you can go to brucecordell.com and click on the credits page. Or just, type my name into something, I guess. And like I said, if you do it for long enough, even though it's just your day-to-day job, it just builds up over time.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you for being here. If you could grab your battery packs and take a bow.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Downey, for moderating. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that was
always
that
good
was,
to have a moderator.
It was made it so much
And
easier.
thanks for being such a great panelist, man.
Yeah, I loved it.